In this video, I'm going to tell you about 5 different one-shots that I've run that you can steal for your games. This video is sponsored by Chepeku Maps, more on them later. Greetings gamers, my name is Anto and I'm an Eldritch Blast addict, and I made a video like this a couple of years ago talking about 5 of my favourite one-shots that I've ever run, and it was really popular, so I thought I'd make a follow-up where I talk about 5 more of my favourite one-shots that I've run in the time since, and give you ideas for you to steal and add to your own campaigns. A couple of these have been adapted into fully written, ready to run little short adventure modules, and I'll talk about them as they come up, but some of them are ones that I've just run and I'm just going to talk over the broad concepts for you to steal and adapt and use in your own campaigns. So to kick things off, I want to start with Damn, That's Nasty. This is a relatively recent one shot that I ran and one that I have turned into a written adventure and included in issue 34 of SIDEQUEST, which is currently available, link in the doobly-doo. And the premise of this adventure is the players are in a city or a large settlement somewhere that there can be a dam. A dam has been built to block off a section of water, and as that construction has neared completion, the workers start to report seeing strange, aberrant creatures in and around the maintenance structure at the bottom of the dam. Shortly after, people start going missing, people start mutating, and things start getting really weird, and your players are kind of asked to go into the maintenance structure, which has been abandoned, to deal with the problem. The setup for this is that some sort of aberration, typically an aboleth or something like that, has set up in the waters of the dam. Maybe it has been there for hundreds of years, sleeping beneath the waters, and the construction of the dam disrupted it, or maybe it arrived through some other means. But from whatever reason, it has taken up residence in the maintenance structure at the base of the dam, and it is leaching this contamination into the water. It's got this cosmic radiation that it is imparting into the water that is making people sick, it's making them mutate, and there are these strange aberrant mutations appearing all across the city, and particularly in the creatures guarding the master aberrant that's in the structure. So the PCs will turn up, they'll fight a bunch of these lesser mutated creatures outside the entrance to the maintenance structure, defeat them, head on inside, and then we get to play with some classic horror elements, dark, claustrophobic tunnels, the polluted water that hopefully, if you've done your job right, the players absolutely will not want to touch by any means, which is a great way to shuffle them into tight little spaces and to allow otherwise lesser creatures, like lower level creatures, to have a really big impact. This is a level 8 adventure as it's written, though you could run it at whatever level you want, just tweak the monsters involved. But by having the water be contaminated and the players being so afraid of it, these low-level creatures can come up, and them trying to push the player characters into the water immediately makes these creatures much more of a threat than their CR would otherwise make them. But the main juice that we're here for is the main boss monster, this aberration creature. As I said, this could be something like an aboleth or something inspired by an aboleth. In the written adventure, it is called the Eldritch Progenitor, and it is inspired by an aboleth, but it takes a bunch of its features up to 11, so it still has a bunch of like enslave abilities, but they're conditioned based on how many levels of contagion your players have gained. And I'm going to talk more about this adventure in next week's episode, because it's a lot of fun, and I did some interesting things with the contamination and kind of the diseases element of this adventure that made it so that the players didn't treat it like they typically would with the diseases, and I think it worked really well, and I want to do a whole video about that, which I'm going to do next week. But they fight the big bad monster, which is going to be in a large pool of this contaminated water. So you've got an environmental hazard, you've got players being pulled into the contaminated juice, and it's just a really fun adventure to play with environmental hazards, to add in a level of kind of disease and poison style hazards as well as just your traditional combat. And I found that it worked really well to layer all of these things on top of each other, and it allowed much lower level monsters to hit well above their weight class and allowed them to be much more threatening than they otherwise would be, and made for much more interesting combats than you typically get by just standing in a line and hitting each other. The next one shot I want to talk about is called The Cave of Screaming Tomorrows. So my player characters are part of a free company, a mercenary group, an adventuring guild that goes out into the world and does odd jobs. And as part of one of these odd jobs, they picked up a treasure map of the local region that had a bunch of different points of interest marked on it with evocative names. And this is something that I do really frequently. I have locations marked on the map, and I have no idea what's there at the location other than a really cool name. And one of the names of the location was the Cave of Screaming Tomorrows. And when I wrote that down on this piece of paper as a map and handed it to the players, I had no idea what was going to be there. I had no idea what was going to be there until pretty much the night that I was running this adventure. And I decided that it would have to do with time magic, chronomancy, and the manipulation of time. Chronomancy has been a fairly big player in all of my campaigns that I've been running with this group over the last 7 or 8 years. And it always tends to come up. They always tend to run into things that involve chronomancy. So it felt fitting to start to inject a little bit of that time spice into our campaign at this point. We were still fairly early on into the campaign at this point. The premise is that they arrive in this cave, and within the cave, everything looks fairly natural, except for a door. This door is very much advanced mechanics. So it looks to the sort of medieval allegory people of this world like a completely alien thing. It is built in metals that they don't understand. It is built with shapes and geometries they've never seen before. And it leads to a facility that is basically the study of incredibly powerful magical phenomena. The players arrive and there is the door, and there's a kind of a console next to it, like a little receptacle type thing. And I decided that whichever player character went up and interacted with this thing, this facility is going to try and guard itself. And the way it does that is by picking an alternate future timeline from the person that interacts with the door and deploying like an evil version of them to go and attack them. So the party fighter, who was a gnoll, goes and tries to open the door and interact with the door. And then out of a nearby chamber, this older, weathered, grizzled looking version of the party gnoll with this kind of awesome looking axe that had like this grinning skull face emerges and just goes to town attacking the party. It was a really cool and interesting fight because they were fighting in like an older alternate version of themselves, and when they'd been defeated, they got to take this character's axe, and now this character has the axe that they had in the future, and you start to get that self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. It was all good stuff. Then they managed to get inside the facility and discover that this whole place is dedicated to the study of incredibly powerful and weird, esoteric, magical phenomena. They find all sorts of powerful, magical weirdness going on, and eventually they come to this staircase, this seemingly infinite staircase, which I will note, I did before D&D had the Infinite Staircase book, so I'm calling dibs. And they decide,
it's a staircase. An infinite staircase is a staircase to nowhere. We're obviously going to climb the staircase.
And I had this massive wild magic surge table, something like 10,000 results that I'd found online. And I just started having them roll for the random effects that would happen as they climbed these stairs. And every so often, as they climbed the stairs, every period of distance, they'd make a roll on this wild surge table and get a magical effect. So things that happened were one of the players became insanely paranoid that they were going to be murdered, and then they became paranoid that they were going to be murdered by someone taller than them, and then they became paranoid that they were going to be murdered by someone close to them. They were the second tallest member of the party, so they then became paranoid that the party fighter was going to murder them because that was the only choice left to them by this series of rolls on this wild magic table. We had one of the players lose the ability to be able to touch anything that would let them read or write. If they touched any paper or pens or anything like that, it would just crumble to dust. So they lost the ability to interact with writing implements. there was another player that lost the ability to climb stairs and ladders. So he was playing as a fairy barbarian. So he had a mount. So he just stayed on his mount all the time and just got his mount to carry him upstairs. And he just couldn't climb ladders anymore. Another player just became convinced that he had some great knowledge right at the periphery of his mind, and that he was so close to making a groundbreaking discovery, and it meant that he just could not go to sleep anymore. So he spent days unable to sleep until he was able to cure himself with magic. But he had days where he just could not gain the benefits of rest because he was like, I can feel it. If I go to sleep, I'll lose it. I can feel this great discovery right on the bounds of my mind. And then eventually, one of their roles led them to being translocated. So they got shunted across the world and ended up in a completely different location, addled with all of these negative, and some positive, but mostly negative effects from the stairs. And they had to figure out where they were, what the hell had happened to them, and how to deal with these effects. And they never cleared off some of these events. So the paranoid player just never stopped being paranoid. She was just always worried that the party fighter was just going to murder her at some point. It took months for the party barbarian to regain his ability to climb stairs and ladders without being on his mount. But he did gain the ability to talk to dolphins. So the next time they were in a body of water, he talked to the local dolphins and asked them where they go and what they do, and got a bunch of rumors and new locations for their map from that. And it was a really interesting session to just get some weirdness injected in, and it's nice to have a break from a regular campaign and just inject some weirdness. But it was also a really good way to give them a bunch of plot seeds all at once that they could go off and then start to explore over time. Another one of my favorite one-shots that I've run in the last couple of months is relating to a Pathfinder monster called the Fortune Eater. Now, it has some really cool abilities that play into the luck and dice mechanics that are inherent to a TTRPG. And it allows you to impact the player's fortunes and their luck and force them to get negative effects. And it's got a bunch of cool mechanics that I was really interested in playing with and expanding on narratively. So what I did was I had the party pick up a random job from their local job board, which was essentially, there's been a bunch of problems at a local cave. People have been kind of attacked nearby to this cave by spirits. Typical kind of lower level adventuring stuff that you'd expect to do in a game like D&D. So the players head off to go and deal with some ghosts. They get there, they arrive at this beach, they start to see hallucinations of the beach as just this great battlefield. They start being hounded by spirits, and eventually they're driven into this seaside cave, which is the lair of the Fortune Eater, and it starts to mess around with their luck and their fortune, and they fight against this thing, and as they do battle with it, they realize that kind of this whole thing's spirit is connected to a corpse inside the cave, and the corpse inside the cave has been stabbed with this dagger. They realize if they pull the dagger out of the corpse, they can kind of untether the spirit. And in doing so, they end the combat and they can speak to the spirit, and they discover that this whole thing has been kind of kicked off by a pirate group that has landed here, and they kind of all turned on each other. And the Fortune Eater is the last pirate who died in this cave and is kind of a vengeful spirit who wants revenge and wants to claim their pirate prize. And the players discovered that this group of pirates were trying to find a specific treasure, and essentially they made a deal with the spirit that if the spirit agrees to tell them where this treasure is potentially located, then once they find it, they will bring some of it back to this cave and bury the remains with the treasure and kind of lay this ghost to rest properly with the treasure. So the ghost kind of splits itself off. Each of the players gets one of these cursed coins infused with a fragment of this pirate spirit, and the spirit tells them vaguely where some of these pirate caches that have the information that leads them on this grander quest could be. And when they get closer to these caches, the coin will start to vibrate or hum or give some indication that they're getting close and give them further instructions. And this was kind of the first leg on a wider quest line that the players could interact with entirely on their own time. So there was no kind of time limit to it. There was no time pressure to it. It was just something that they had, that if they had nothing else to do that week, or if they were in a region nearby to where they knew one of the pirate caches was, they could choose to go and investigate that and pursue this plot line at their own leisure, which is something that's really important if you're running a large open sandbox game, which is what I'm doing at the minute, giving these open-ended quests that the players can kind of do on their own time and whenever they feel like it, to give them that sense of, oh, we can do anything we want in the world, we can go anywhere we want, and to help them not feel like they're being railroaded, even though a lot of the time, even in quite an open world, you still have to railroad the players quite a lot, otherwise they just meander. This video is sponsored by Chepeku Maps. Chepeku have been a long-time supporter of the channel, and for good reason. They make some of the best maps on the market. Anytime I need a map for my games, the very first place I go is to the Chepeku map browser to see if they've got something that suits my need. And more these days, especially running an open sandbox campaign, I find myself just going to the map browser, finding a cool map and using that as the starting point for my planning and putting together one-shots for my games anyway. Their Patreon, which is linked below, has got thousands of maps with multiple different variations, both gridded and ungridded, day-night cycles, different effects on the map, anything that you could want or need for your game, they should have it on there. At the higher tiers, you'll also get access to VTT-compatible versions, so you can get access to versions you can load straight into Foundry, and this has been so good for saving me so much time when running my campaign. Just load up the map straight into Foundry, all of the walls, all of the lighting already done, saves so much time when I'm prepping my game. So if you're interested, head to the link down in the description below to check out Chepeku Maps, and thanks again to them for supporting the channel. The next adventure I want to talk about is from my book A Night of Adventure Volume 1, which is a collection of 7 short, ready-to-run 5th edition adventures, and it's called The Armor of Ezanos. The premise of this adventure is the player characters are asked to transport a set of cursed armor from point A to B. All the while they're transporting it, this armor is going to be whispering to them, encouraging them to take the armor out of its protective casing and to put the armor on. And whilst they are making the transport, cultists dedicated to Ezanos, who is like a demonic lord, are going to be attempting to take the armor back and put the armor set on and kind of reincarnate the demon Ezanos. I ran this a little bit differently. The adventure as written is for 3rd level play, and I was running it for a much higher level party. So I decided that I would run kind of a sequel to the written adventure. So the written adventure is supposed to be players transport armor from point A to B, and point B is supposed to be the final resting place of the armor. So I ran it as the players were discovering the final resting place of the armor. And as they're traveling down the road, they run into another group of explorers who are fleeing. And this group of explorers have uncovered the final resting place of Ezanos' armor. In doing so, they've unleashed the various curses, very pulpy adventure horror. They've unleashed the various curses of this tomb, and they are fleeing away from it. The players hear of this, and obviously they're like,
well, it's only over there, and it sounds kind of cool, so we should probably go and have a look.
As they enter into the tomb, they see a variety of signs, stone tablets, writings in every language that has ever been up until the point where the tomb was sealed, basically saying, danger, stay away. But obviously, human nature being what it is, they press forward, ignore all the signs being like, this is the worst place that you could possibly be, don't go any further. They just go straight past it. And they head inside and they find the sarcophagus that is holding the armor. And sure enough, they open it up and give life to the armor and release it, and the armor is able to kind of temporarily pull itself out and gain form for a time. And that was the first TPK of that particular campaign. So they opened the chest, unleashed the armor, and when I was planning this particular adventure and this combat, I thought, cool, this armor is going to have a very limited set of abilities when it first comes out. the first thing it's going to try and do is dominate someone because it's a set of armor. It wants someone else to do its work for it. I set the DC fairly low because I thought no one wants to get dominated, but if it happens, it'll be kind of cool. Dominates. The very first roll managed to dominate one of the players. So they dominate the ranger in the party. The ranger casts silence, which means the party wizard is just out of the fight immediately because they're right in the middle of a bubble of silence and can't do anything. And then from there, the fight kicks off and things are going okay until the domination on the ranger breaks and the ranger flees. As soon as the ranger breaks and runs, it's over. People start going down, people start dropping, people start dying, and when the dust settles, the only person that makes it out alive is the ranger who started out dominated and silenced everyone, and it was a mess for them. But the reason why it's one of my favourite one-shots from the last few years is because this was the turning point in this campaign. This was when I was running in Ashk, which is the setting that I have a whole playlist of talking about. This was the point that started essentially the apocalypse in that nation. So Ezanos is a demon lord and is an incredibly powerful and bad dude. And in awakening him and letting him free and giving him a bunch of people to puppet right then and there as soon as he comes out of his tomb, what the players had inadvertently done is kicked off a series of events that resulted in the apocalypse. So they made new characters. We jumped forward in time a little bit, and they then are working to try and steal an artifact. And as they're doing that, agents of Ezanos are also trying to steal that artifact. And again, through a cluster of bad decisions, the bad guys end up getting away and they open Pandora's box and release the apocalypse. And then for the next 6 months, we play out this incredible campaign of them trying to undo the apocalypse while trying to beat the doomsday clock, trying to defeat the demonic, twisted versions of their former characters. So all of the characters that died in that initial tomb encounter became lieutenants devoted to Ezanos, and they would go to different locations and they would fight demonic versions of their former selves and in these little mini boss battles. And then eventually they fight Ezanos again, and that's the culmination of the campaign, is they take him to this like horrible different plane of existence type place, have a big old showdown as the map like changes around them, and it all came from this little one shot where they opened the wrong thing and the party ranger got dominated and then fled, and this cascade of events led to changing the entire course of the campaign. And that's one of the things that I love the most about one-shots, is that you can start thinking, oh, this is going to be a one-off thing this week, and you don't know the ripples that they can end up creating. The final one-shot I want to talk about today is called The Greatest Song in the World, and this took place towards the end of our Ashk campaign, towards the end of most of my campaigns. There tends to be a little break where the players go planes hopping for a bit. They usually have to find some MacGuffin, or, you know, they want a chance to level up their powers a little bit before they go for the final showdown. And they tend to go hopping around the planes just for a little break from the main action before they go and deal with the kind of final boss. And that's what they were doing here. They were jumping around the planes, trying to acquire legendary items, power-ups, kind of get themselves ready for this final showdown. And for this adventure, we were focusing on the party bard. We wanted something to power up the party bard, and she'd heard of songs of power, these incredibly powerful magical songs that you can learn from especially accomplished bards and spellcasters out in the world that can do incredible things. So they decided they wanted to hunt one of these down. They'd picked up the location from someone else, and they were out in the Feywild looking for the Fossagrim. Now, the Fossagrim is a custom monster that has appeared in SIDEQuest, and that alludes to Songs of Power, and Songs of Power have kind of turned up a little bit here and there throughout SIDEQuest, and this is the first time that I'd played with them in any mechanical sense. And the way that I chose to do it was by utilizing songs of the 80s. I chose 80s rock and metal as being my foundation for Songs of Power. So I loaded up a big old playlist of all of my favorite 80s rock and metal music, and I went down the list and looked for evocative names of songs and songs with evocative lyrics that I could imagine setting fights to. We were playing in VTT and Foundry at the time, and you can load in music to this. And the way I structured the entire one-shot was that every combat, every set piece had a soundtrack. So the first one, after the players arrive in the region that they were going to be doing this in, and the Fossagrim becomes aware of them, the first one was going to be that they would encounter a trio of hags, and the battle was going to be set to Black Sabbath's War Pigs. And my thinking behind this was the opening lines where it talks about witches at black masses. So the players are walking through the woods, and the woods all suddenly change and become swamp-like, very much like the woods with Auntie Ethel in Baldur's Gate 3, but this was, a couple of years before that. So they're walking through the woods, and the woods all change, and it becomes very dark and gloomy, and there are these 3 hags. And then I just started those opening notes of War Pigs, asked for initiative to be rolled, and the entire combat took place to the backdrop of this instrumental and spliced together version of War Pigs that I'd made. So it ran through the song, and then we had like instrumental playing for the song for the rest of the combat, and it was super cool. It's something that I started doing a lot of after this point, was using a lot more music, which I'll come back to because I have a related note about the Ezanos questline with music, and I'll touch on that at the end. They get through this fight and then come to the Fossagrim's Glade, and as part of that fight I had a couple of songs lined up. One of them was going to be Master of Puppets, as the Fossagrim starts using kind of charm and domination magics to puppeteer the various members of the party. And then the song of power that they were there to learn was the song On Thrashing Oars, and this was the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. And the manifestation of this magic was it would summon a spectral Viking longship filled with spectral warriors, which would lend their aid in battle. And anytime the bard used this magic, they would play the Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. They defeated the Fossagrim, they learned the Song of Power, and then for the rest of the campaign, anytime they used the Song of Power, and I think they could only use it once a day, I don't exactly remember, it's been a while, but I think they could use it once a day. So they only got to use it a handful of times before the end of the campaign. But anytime they used the Song of Power, we would play the Immigrant Song in the background for the duration of the Song of Power, and having all of those spectral warriors on the battlefield, and that was really cool. But going back to using more music in my games, traditionally I'd only use sort of ambient fantasy music, your typical tavern style stuff. But this particular one shot made me start using a lot more popular, really iconic music, because it makes it feel like a movie when the players are fighting a big epic boss fight, and you put an incredible piece of well-known music to the background. It makes them feel like they're in the movie and they're hearing the soundtrack. For our last fight of that campaign against Ezanos, I had this awesome epic instrumentation of Bonnie Tyler's I Need a Hero that I spliced together and made like a 10-minute version of, and that's what we played that final boss fight to. And it was amazing. Like, it proper pumped them up when I Need a Hero started playing after initiative was rolled, and they're like, this is awesome. So I highly recommend that you use a lot more music, especially like soundtracky style music in your games. So there we have it, 5 more one-shots that I've run in my campaigns. I really recommend that you run some one-shots, even if you're running a long-term campaign. Break up some of the flow with some one-off games, and you never know, you might just end up killing your entire party and kicking off a series of events that lead to an apocalypse and changing the entire course of your campaign, which is awesome. I'd love to know what you think of all of these down in the comments below, and if you haven't checked out the original version of this video, you can check it out right here. But until next time, happy gaming.